There's nothing inevitable about the pathway that we are on in terms of the development and structure of the mediated environment. There's nothing inevitable about it. It is a constructed set of decisions that are taken in real time, and we often just simply think about them after the fact.
Nothing inevitable? Really? It seems to me that our media ecosystem, just like the environment, is in crisis, and it is getting totally out of control. Extremist arguments, privacy undermined, democratic values manipulated, youth suffering. I've been concerned about the damage to our society caused by this polluted media environment for years now. So, when a group of university researchers working to understand these problems asked me to film them, I was curious to find out if the academic world could help us put together this media puzzle.
Would we ban ads about healthcare or immigration or women's empowerment? And if you're not going to ban those, does it really make sense to give everyone else a voice in political debates except for the candidates themselves? So there are going to be issues any way you cut this. And I believe that when it's not absolutely clear what to do, that we should err on the side of greater expression.
It really depends on whom you ask, who would tell you if digital technology and of course the big tech companies comply with the basic principles of freedoms and human rights on the one hand, and of course individual self-determination in the information space. And particularly, I mean, to begin with Mark Zuckerberg and his famous Georgetown speech, they obviously champion themselves or promote themselves as proponents of free speech, because this is basically another way of saying, you know, we don't need any regulation because it's all about freedoms. And this is also maybe important to say that this is a very, in a cultural sense, a very American way of looking at things. While I think in Europe we have a much more, also by means of, you know, historic experience, a much more tighter understanding of regulation in this space.
There are also, lines being drawn by different pieces of legislation, and we have to be careful about those line drawing exercises. But those lines are an integral part of freedom of expression because they determine where the limits, the outer limits of the right lie. And I think whenever you've got line drawing, whether it's for countries or rules, there's always going to be a certain amount of contestation and challenging where those lines are drawn and by whom.
I've been wondering how to give a metaphor, because these are two quite complex proposals. And the best thing I think I came to think of was the first ever traffic light that brought order in the streets. That was actually in the US, in Cleveland, Ohio. And that was invented as a response to a major technological disruption, the invention of the car. And I think just like back then, it's more than 100 years ago, now we have such an increase in the online traffic that we need to make rules that put order into chaos.
I think what is interesting about Europe is that it's a different combination of a struggle between a European belief in the benefits of technological innovation and the development of homegrown European media outlets and the entry of foreign dominant platforms. And that is a struggle, and it is ongoing, and we see it in the implementation of new legislation. And we've been seeing that struggle go on for the last 20 years or so. And it is reaching something of a crescendo now, as there is more and more outrage, if you like, about about the disregard of the US-owned platforms for those fundamental human rights. So what's distinctive about Europe is that that struggle has been visible for a lot longer than it has been if you take the United States, Canada, Australia, some countries in Asia. So I think they are in a way catching up with Europe, and they are having their own struggles and putting their own legislation in place.
The trend is very clear. We are going towards a global communication world. For the first time in media history, now decisions taken in China and in the United States affect directly the way we are communicating. So what is delivered or developed in China in regard of ByteDance and TikTok affects our young people here in Europe. We are at the verge of a world where regulation and policy and rules are so close to one another that we need to find new ways of dealing with that. So there still is, we are still all living in the national environment. We all are affected by rules which apply to the nation states we are living in.
I find it difficult sometimes to accept that I cannot hold accountable people, entities, which have a huge impact on my daily life just because they're far away. It seems clear now that in order to reclaim some agency at the local level, we have to innovate and intensify our international collaboration.
Just the question of how do you tax Google, for instance, is a question that sort of spans multiple jurisdictions and multiple ministries, and it's sort of difficult for them to work together, is my impression. To come up with solutions, because I mean there are sort of labor issues, there are technology issues, there are competition issues, there are cross-border issues that sort of span multiple ministries, and they're organized differently in different countries. So one thing is to make sure that people who work in regulating these also sort of know a little bit about the technical architecture of these structures.
The biggest problem is that, of course, we need kind of a global framework, a bit like in climate change, right? If you just regulate in the Netherlands, it wouldn't, stop climate change probably. You really need a global framework and a global approach. And I think the IPCC and COP is just kind of telling us how difficult this is. And now if we speak about kind of a little bit like an analogy in the information space, where in meteorology or climate change, you really see temperatures gradually rising, you see more and more extreme events also happening in the information space, and you have a phenomena which doesn't respect any borders. So you need kind of a global jurisdiction which doesn't exist really. So this is something which you cannot just bridge with a new institution, because it wouldn't have the power to regulate at a global level. So this is where, practically speaking, and it matters a lot what happens in the United States, because that's the relevant jurisdiction for almost all of these companies we're talking about.
First thing that's needed is ongoing, sincere dialogue between all stakeholders. That might sound like a wishy-washy measure, but it is very important. The criticism of just sitting around the table is, of course, that it won't always lead to hard consequences, that you won't necessarily have enforcement mechanisms. Indeed, that's a criticism of some of the self-regulatory and co-regulatory initiatives that have been developed over the years. But I think we see a movement over the past years, the so-called business and human rights, or these ideas of corporate social responsibility. And they have achieved a lot of political traction, and I think that's very important, because then you see within the business sector itself there is an opening up to and an embracing of these human rights standards in their activities. I do think, however, that more is needed. I think there needs to be some, you need to put some steel into these political initiatives, and in some cases make the commitments legally binding to give them real teeth and sharp teeth.
The purpose of today's hearing is to examine the dominance of Amazon, Apple, Facebook, and Google. Our two objectives have been to document competition problems in the digital economy and to evaluate whether the current antitrust framework is able to properly address them.
In 2007, Google purchased DoubleClick, the leading provider of certain advertising tools. When Google proposed the merger, alarm bells were raised about the access to data Google would have, specifically the ability to connect a user's personal identity with their browsing activity. In June of 2016, Google went ahead and merged this data anyway, effectively destroying anonymity on the internet.
I review at a high level all important decisions we make. We deeply care about privacy and security of our users.
So you signed off on the decision?
User consent for.
Okay, you signed off on the decision.
If you think of, again, social media platforms, it's as I was saying before, is an industry based, founded on an unethical business model. Some people will call it surveillance capitalism. Other people will call it data colonialism. So, and then you kind of understand that this is not, democratic media. This is not good journalism. This is a bunch of people trying to make a lot of money out of us. So from the very beginning, all those social media platforms, they never really cared about us. They just cared. They were designed in incredibly minimal detail to manipulate our behavior, to understand everything they could understand about us, so they could not only manipulate our behavior, but this manipulated behavior would also be very profitable. Now, it's unclear whether they really manipulate our behavior, so I'm talking about intentions here, right? So I would say that the social media platforms, they were born out of this major ethical crisis, which is, of course, connected with an economic crisis that's not necessarily lack of money, is the greed, is the need to make as much money as possible. And that, of course, has led to all sorts of political crises. Not, again, engineered by social media platforms. I don't think social media platforms wanted to undermine democracy, but they clearly help it.
In June 2022, I watched, just like other French citizens, an unprecedented number of MPs from the far-right party of Marine Le Pen entering the French Parliament. So I understand that social media didn't necessarily mean to harm democracy, but still, that has happened. Examples, such as the deadly propaganda against the Rohingya, can be seen in many places. So what are we supposed to do about it? A democratic society relies on a free and rational exchange of ideas. How can we sustain that when private media entities, devoid of ethical obligations, can drive the discussion wherever they want it to go?
I mean, one thing that is clear is that we've got unprecedented opportunities, largely thanks to technological developments, to communicate with each other and to participate in public debate and to get our message and ideas across the whole world, actually, and at a very quick speed. There is, of course, a downside to all of that, and that means that there's a lot of nonsense in the world as well as wisdom. And I suppose what we have to be worried about is are the volumes of dangerous nonsense that can now circulate with a much greater speed and often with much more devastating impact in worst-case scenarios.
I like to think that social media, the best way of social media to be governed is a way that social media can also be understood as not something, top-down, that someone in California decides that that's how I should speak or that's how I should behave. but it's something that people together can come and discuss, right? So maybe the question is how to come up with a democratic Leviathan. So the Leviathan, if you go see the image, the original illustration for Thomas Hobbes' book is this big person made up of little people. So like everyone coming together, you form this bigger body, this bigger being. So the question is how to make a democratic Leviathan, right?
I don't think that the media is a problem for democracy, because democracy cannot be without media. Always has been so. I mean, because through media we get the daily information, the media, newspapers, television, whatever, it updates the world every day to us. Not only in the form of news or information, but also in the form of cultural program, because I mean, culture is how to say, separated part of our life. The question is that now then, I mean, how accountable the media is then to the real needs of people today. How well it reflects our everyday needs and our wishes and aspirations today. And this is a big question, because I mean, we see that the media sphere environment has been commercializing very much so. So we are offered something that doesn't really always meet our relevant needs. So then I would say that media is the problem. It is maybe those people who are running the media, or those forces who are deciding on behalf of us.
So I think we need to look at the ecology as something larger. If the media is, and if journalism in particular, is instrumental as a watchdog of the state, in a sense, and also as a carrier of the public conversation, and as a link between people and those in power, then these internet infrastructures are part of that. And not just the platforms, I think, but also the structures that make the platforms possible, and data ontologies and logics and data engineering processes that go on, behind the screen.
I think Europe, first of all, has a history of protecting media values and seeing the central role of media for democratic societies. And I think we are trying in Europe to transpose these values to the digital ecosystem. Whereas we have two main internet systems, more or less. We have a corporate internet system, which is the US-based one, and here market values rule. So there you see why Facebook and Twitter and Google are thriving there, because they are designing their platforms to make more profit. And then on the other hand, you have the Chinese internet ecosystem, which is very state-directed. So everything is designed in a certain way to make sure that the state retains its powerful function. And I think what we are doing in Europe is what we should be trying to do as well, is to transform the digital ecosystem along the values that we uphold for media in a democratic system. And this is a challenge, because there's like two main systems that we're more or less fighting against. And the challenge for Europe is to be able to provide a third alternative that is a media ecosystem, a digital media ecosystem that upholds democratic values.
In order to strengthen this idea of public interest, public service, information, we need to strengthen as well this idea that journalists are, or their foremost and most noble task is to serve democracy, if we want. And we, with the project of the Media for Democracy Monitor, we found out that indeed there is still in the majority of the countries a strong ethos of this sort of democracy serving information and an ethos as journalists serving this. But the situation for journalists and journalism is that there are huge commercial pressures on them, and this has many facets and many aspects.
And so we find ourselves in this tragic situation where precisely when we need more and better reporting all over the world, we're being taught, despite ourselves, to undervalue reporting.
But who is to blame? Who is making us undervalue journalism today? A few ideas come to my mind. Could it be citizens with millions of followers spreading their often sensational views?
I consider it to be an invasion. As you know, Mr. President,
or populist presidents like Donald Trump constantly alleging that news they don't like is fake? Or even the profession of journalism itself, by overrepresenting certain elite perspectives? It is easy to get confused in a time where good and bad journalism can be found in many different places.
This week, we're going to focus on the media. Now, like in other parts of the world, the media in France is in a bit of a crisis. The rise of the internet has led to a change in the way people consume the news, and many people say they just don't trust journalists anymore.
If I were to pick a title for our Journalism Trust Initiative, which we do at Reporters Without Borders today, I would definitely not choose the term trust. Because, and this is what we've learned the hard way, trust is very subjective. But I believe when we speak about information, it's more about trustworthiness, which is something else. Because this is how your expectation in a service, for example, like journalism, is actually then delivered, and if it actually pays off and contributes to your, informational self-determination. The question of trustworthiness depends a lot on the definition what we mean by journalism. I mean, you can trust somebody who tells you that the earth is flat, but this is not journalism and obviously also not a fact. So I think this pretty much goes down to the Enlightenment and the question about truthfulness and facts and how they are being conveyed. And if this is a definition of journalism, and this is a pretty, I would say, procedural question of how the methods and kind of the manufacturing of journalism works as a craft, conveying facts and also presenting them in a way that they're digestible for people, then yes, then this is basically what, of course, is to be trusted.
Accuracy itself is fraught with judgments, and it's not up to us as academics to tell other people how to think, but it is a responsibility as us as academics or journalists to provide enough context for the kind of information that they're providing to enable people to use whatever literacy they have to make sense of the world in which they're living. And for the most part, it seems to me that even the investigative journalists are so squeezed for time reasons or for reasons of lack of knowledge or whatever it is, that they aren't able to provide that kind of basis for reasoned judgment. And a greater space needs to be created for that, I would say.
As we reported, conspiracy theorist Alex Jones has been ordered to pay nearly $1 billion, $965 million to be exact, for the lies he spread about the Sandy Hook Elementary School massacre in 2012. Jones had falsely claimed the attack that left more than 24 people dead, including 20 children, was a hoax.
The broad assumption, more or less, that we see is that people think of information processing as something cognitive. And this is a big mistake. Information processing is sociological, it's cultural, it's social. So this means that fact-checking often doesn't work because people are not changed in their opinions by facts only. It's very much about who are you as the conveyor of information? Can I relate to you? Are you part of my group? Do I trust you? And also, what do I lose if I change my opinion?
Alternative media, and of course this is a very broad term and also may lead to a lot of confusion, but looking at local and regional media, for instance, and fostering local and regional identities, there I think there is a possibility to remedy that mainstream, perhaps more centralist view, you know. Okay, we know that this kind of journalism is in very bad shape. Local and regional journalists are being harassed, badly paid, freelancers, so their ethical compass, their norms may be, perhaps hindered by this quite difficult economical situation. But I think, and that's a good thing about the immediate future in the Netherlands, is to foster local and regional news media and make it visible and create also a national platform with different regional and local news media platforms combined, clustered, so that people can have another point of reference, different points of reference.
We are living in a time where uncertainty prevails, and this uncertainty can be moderated by the media, it can be moderated by news.
For a while, I thought that maybe the solution was to simply not consume anything. No news, no social networks, block them all. But information is like water. It makes its way through many complex paths, and it is essential to our social life and understanding of the world. To absorb all this information, we human beings use filters, such as going towards information that confirms our views. This is not new knowledge for the tech giants. For a long time, they have been studying our behavior to know exactly how to make us come back, click again, stay scrolling, watching, and capture our attention. Today, the famous algorithm probably knows us better than our best friend.
Mr. Pichai, most Americans believe that when they enter a search query that what Google shows are the most relevant results. But increasingly, Google just shows whatever is most profitable for Google.
We've always focused on providing users the most relevant information, and we rely on that trust for users to come back to Google every day.
I think it's also important still that the way these algorithms are designed and optimized, that they should carry public values or professional journalistic values as well. And this is what you see lacking in the algorithms of corporate platforms, social media platforms, in contrast to the algorithms of media corporations and public service media that try to incorporate or design algorithms that actually serve public values.
And this is where the society, we all together, should have a certain kind of steering role, where we do want money to be invested, what kind of journalism we would like to have, what kind of entertainment we would like to have. Should that be in the hands of professionals, or should that be in the hands of laymen who are producing their little snippets of videos on digital platforms? So a new balance needs to be found.
By far, most of the emphasis has been on curbing existing platform dominance. As academics, as civil society, we have to be more vocal and make sure that it doesn't stop there, because we are not addressing the fundamental underlying problems, which have to do with the business model, basically, how these platforms operate. So we have to push for alternatives. And I think this is the only way that this can work. So we cannot let them, forget about this. We have to make sure, we have to do our best to try and make this happen.
The advertising expenditure has been increased dramatically. It did not go any longer to newspapers and television, but it did go and still goes to the digital platforms. So it's there at the moment where the money really sits, and we can see that there is a lot of investment going on in the area of public communication. The latest has been Elon Musk, who wanted to invest $44 billion. This shows only how important these platforms really are also for business.
their business model is obviously to grow as much as possible, and they have responsibilities to their shareholders. And this doesn't necessarily correspond too well with democratic principles for communication, like inclusion and diversity.
Even when they are completely publicly owned, they are using algorithms and practicing datafication in a way that shapes hearts and minds, albeit in a slightly different way maybe than would be happening if they were commercial. But they're still completely fascinated by the use of untransparent algorithms and by the notion that it should not be clear to people in general as to what is happening to them in terms of their mediated life. And that is ever more true as long as more and more artificial intelligence, machine learning starts to govern the way algorithms work. And the public entities are doing it just as much in order to, in quotes, compete with the commercial players. And this brings, the idea that somehow everything would be all right if everything was operating at a commons. I mean, it's just a mystification.
Whereas in the past the question was whether governments, international organizations, and so on should intervene, the question is no longer if, but the question is how.
During the conferences I was invited to attend, I couldn't help thinking that while we are meeting and looking for ways to intervene effectively and solve this media puzzle, every day the public conversation is being shaped by artificial forces that are becoming increasingly opaque.
It is a truism that the sheer amount of power that is vested in these big tech companies, platforms, to use the current jargon, is just immense with a capital I. And these are the de facto gatekeepers of public debate, even though they are private entities. And that has to do with them being able to largely control access to their own platforms, which are so dominant that is of real significance, real communicative significance. So they can control access to their platforms and fora and services, but they also can determine what the conditions of participation are once you're in those or on those platforms and participating there. So they have a lot of control at different levels, and that's inevitably going to shape how public debate is conducted.
The public sphere, it is referred to the kind of a field or sphere of free communication, which is when it is free, it is free from the domination of the political forces or state forces, but also it is free from the domination of market forces. So it is a kind of free area for citizens, ordinary citizens, to converse, to discuss, and to debate. And the idea is that then when they are free, so I think the ideal definition is that the truth then will come out when there is no other forces dominating. People are equal then in this discussion.
The decisions that are being made for the first time in history to enable algorithms and enormous amounts of data processing to effectively govern our lives are not just technological decisions. They are decisions about how to structure the industry, about what business models should be applied. And in that sense, there are real dangers for democracy, for the everyday lives of people. But they are coming not simply from technology and innovations in the technology, but from the decisions that are being made about how to design and use and implement that technology.
Often, when we discuss regulation, we have in mind just the handful of these very, very powerful platforms. And we regulate for them to address their dominance. This is fine, but it's imperative that regulators have to keep in mind that we need more innovation and more competition. So they have to address the dominance of these platforms, major platforms, but at the same time they have to nurture an enabling environment and allow new companies, startups, platforms to come up.
Not enough attention is being given to the possibilities for alternative means of making public service media sustainable. So a lot of the talk is about the principles and the structural conditions that need to be put in place, but not so much attention is given to testing alternative business models. We hear a lot about subscription, but it's difficult for that to scale up to fund it. We hear a lot of concern about authoritarian states gaining control of the media and paying for it. We hear a lot about crowdfunding as a means of supporting the media, but what we don't usually see is a balanced account of all the costs that are necessary to sustain a public service media online, not just the content, but also the whole of the infrastructure. And because we don't see all of those elements that are necessary in order to sustain a public service media discussed at one time in one space together, it's very hard to think about the expectations and the vision of a future that isn't completely commercialized.
As the number of experts I talked to increased, the picture of this media puzzle became more complete, but also more and more complex. When things are complex, I believe it is most important to stick to what really matters to us, ask ourselves the right questions. Will this current media ecosystem support the society we want for our children? Does it respect our basic ideas about rights, freedoms, and public discussion? Our sense of what is acceptable in a democratic community?
You can think that Twitter and Facebook made a good decision in kicking out Donald Trump's account. You can think they made a bad decision, but the fundamental issue that I think should make all of us uncomfortable is it appropriate, even if they have the right to do so, for Facebook and Twitter and a handful of other big tech companies to make these decisions about issues of international free expression and human rights? And again, I think this is one of the fundamental questions of our age.
Human rights should be everywhere, and human rights should infuse all other areas of law and policy, and that necessarily includes the media and online communications and information.
As we think of our communicative environment and the digital context nowadays, there must be a space for human rights. So one way of approaching this is to think that fundamental rights that have been enshrined in charters and should be protected and promoted for individuals and communities in the offline world, they should also apply to the online world. And I think this is where some of the international organizations have come in. So United Nations have expressed some declaration, Council of Europe, the European Union as well. At the regional level, we do find some movements in recognizing that these fundamental rights also apply to the online. But on the other side, we can think of communication rights more of as an umbrella term that brings together some of those rights that have to do with freedom of expression and privacy and the possibility to participate, to associate and come together in communities to express voice. So it's more of an umbrella term that brings all these different elements of democratic participation into being. If we think of the digital context and the challenges it poses, of course we need to bring these elements together. And that's why some people are starting to talk in terms of epistemic rights. To what extent do we have a proper understanding of what is going on and what it takes to the individual and to communities to realize what is behind the operation and the paradigm of the digital. So it's also the way we know and what we do not know about the communication environment in which we're living.
I mean, it's very, very important that we all have heightened levels of media and information literacy or digital literacy, or, call it what you will, but this awareness of the different technologies that are out there, how to use them ourselves as individuals actively, but also passively, how to be able to critique content that is spread online, to be able to, validate or at least question, the provenance or source of information, but also to understand its impact on society, on individuals and on society at large. And it's only when we all achieve that heightened level of media and information or digital literacy that I think we can start to really become comfortable with the technological innovations around us.
Is that because it is not open space, but it is, how to say, segmented or sectorized and so on. So then people are not really discussing with each other, and then the misinformation and disinformation has better opportunities to get hold on people, audiences, which then means that there is no common public sphere to test the different rumors or the different news, so people don't know what is true, what is wrong, what is fake news anymore, which then leaves people in the sphere of uncertainty, and then it can be exploited by, let's say, populist politics for anti-democratic purposes. So internet and social media is not always the best platform for democratic discussion and debate. Seems so.
Today, I feel strongly that this issue has to be faced not only as a technical problem, but as a social and political one. Otherwise, we are just tinkering, pushed around by big tech, hoping it will all eventually be okay. Upgrading our mentality is now necessary. By changing the narrative, we can face the roots of the problem, define which values we want to promote in our society, and actively support them as citizens and as story makers.
Despite the relative hopefulness of moves towards introducing much more stringent European legislation like the Digital Services Act and efforts basically to regulate the online media, which will make a difference, I think it's like moving the deck chairs around on the Titanic, because none of it really fundamentally addresses the underlying business models of these platforms. And as long as it is believed that it is right and proper to commercialize data, not just generated through transactions and buying and selling online, but provided by users, then tinkering, moving the deck chairs around, because the primary objective of the platforms, even if there's a lot of smaller ones, all operating according to that business model, is to make money and not to pay attention to other values.
We started maybe 10, 20 decades ago into the digital age with a lot of enthusiasm, and everything was just bright, and the internet was basically, saving us. And now I think we are moving into the opposite extreme of a techlash where anything is just, disaster.
The longer we continue to believe that technology holds the answer, we just process better data, use more sophisticated algorithms, the less likely it is that there's going to be a happy future for the planet. And that's my pessimistic view. And until we wake up, we, meaning those people who resist that thinking, begin to have more traction with the decision makers who are so committed to investment in the next advance in artificial intelligence, then I think there is a very pessimistic outlook.
Listening to all these experts, I realised that building a healthy media ecosystem is one of those things, like climate change or human rights, that requires constant struggle. So the puzzle is far from being completed. But it is obvious when I see parents overpowered by TikTok and Instagram, this is not just an interesting topic for academics to discuss, it is a major part of our lives. So maybe then it is time, in order to find solutions that will actually make a difference, to place the commons at the heart of the discussion.